They called him the happiest billionaire in America. Tony Hsieh sold shoes on the internet and turned it into a billion-dollar empire built entirely on joy. Then he walked away from all of it, took $350 million of his own money, and aimed it straight at the most forgotten corner of Las Vegas, trying to prove that happiness was not just a feeling. It was a system. It was a science. It was something you could construct from nothing if you believed hard enough and wrote enough checks. He was wrong. And that mistake would cost him everything. On November 27, 2020, Tony Hsieh was gone. 9 days after a fire tore through a small shed in Connecticut, where he had been staying, he died from his injuries. He was 46 years old, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but increasingly isolated. This is not a story about shoes or startups or the clean mythology of Silicon Valley success. This is a story about what happens when a brilliant mind convinces itself that it can engineer the unengineerable, that it can purchase belonging, that it can rebuild a broken city through sheer force of optimism and an unlimited budget. This is the story of Tony Hsieh, and it might be the most American tragedy Las Vegas has ever produced. To understand what Tony was chasing downtown, you have to understand where he started, because nothing about his childhood pointed toward Fremont Street or neon signs or a 40-foot fire-breathing praying mantis. Everything about it pointed toward a kid who spent his whole life trying to figure out how to belong and never quite cracking the code. Tony was born on December 12, 1973, in Illinois. His parents, Richard and Judy, were Taiwanese immigrants who built their American life the hard way, through education, relentless discipline, and sacrifice that did not leave much room for sentimentality. They settled in the suburbs of Marin County, California, and raised Tony and his two younger brothers, Andy and Dave, in a household where achievement was simply the baseline. You did not get credit for meeting expectations. You got credit for exceeding them. Tony was exceptional from early on, the kind of kid who taught himself programming before most adults knew what programming was. He absorbed information at a pace that made teachers nervous. He thought in systems and patterns and structures, always mapping how things connected, always searching for the underlying logic beneath the surface of things. But underneath all of that brilliance was something that never fully resolved. Tony was profoundly lonely. Not the temporary loneliness of a kid who moves to a new school, but something deeper and more persistent. He watched other people connect with each other, and it looked like a language he had studied, but never quite learned to speak. He did not understand social hierarchies. He was not interested in the things that made other kids interesting to each other. He existed at a slight remove from normal human frequency, and for most of his childhood, that felt less like a gift and more like a sentence. What he discovered, early and almost by accident, was that you could compensate. You could build structures that generated the sensation of belonging even when the belonging itself was not quite organic. You could design environments where connection happened around you, even if it did not always happen to you. He tested this theory in high school at Branson School in Marion, where he started his first business selling custom buttons, little pins with designs and slogans that he sold to classmates for small amounts of money, financially trivial. But what Tony observed was striking. People were not buying the buttons because they needed them. They were buying them because the buttons made them feel affiliated with something, part of a tribe. That observation, gleaned from a teenager selling novelty pins in a high school hallway, would quietly govern everything Tony built for the rest of his life. Harvard in 1991. Computer science degree. But the real curriculum for Tony happened in basements and warehouses across Cambridge, where he organized underground parties. He would bring in DJs, charge cover, and fill spaces with students who were starving for something that felt genuine inside an institution built almost entirely on performance and competition. Those events were profitable. More critically, They were experiments. Tony was studying human behavior with the rigor of a researcher before he had any framework to describe what he was doing. What conditions made people open up? What environments made strangers feel like community? What was the formula for the feeling of belonging? He graduated in 1995 and lasted 5 months at Oracle. Corporate life was not merely unattractive to him. It was viscerally wrong. The politics, the hierarchy, the elaborate performance of productivity. He resigned, and in 1996, at 23, co-founded Link Exchange with his college friend Sanjay Madan. The concept was clean and simple. Websites would trade banner advertisements with each other rather than paying for placements. Small businesses loved it immediately, and growth was explosive. By 1998, Link Exchange had millions of members and approaching 100 employees. Microsoft arrived with a $265 million offer. Tony was 24. He said yes, but the money came wrapped in a warning he would spend years ignoring. In the months before the acquisition closed, as Link Exchange scaled beyond anything Tony could manage personally, the culture disintegrated. The company he had built on energy and shared mission looked suddenly like every corporate environment he had ever despised. People were collecting paychecks, not building something. The vitality was gone. And Tony, watching it happen, made himself a promise. Next time, culture would not be an afterthought. It would be the architecture. Everything else would be built around it. Then in 1999, a man named Nick Swinmurn pitched him on selling shoes over the internet. Zappos, short for zapatos, the Spanish word for shoes. The premise was widely considered absurd. Who would buy footwear online without trying it on, without touching the leather or testing the fit? Everyone in Silicon Valley passed. Tony nearly passed too. What stopped him was the realization that he was not being asked to invest in a shoe company. He was being asked to invest in a culture experiment with a shoe company as its operating vehicle. He put in $500,000, then more. By 2000, he was CEO. What followed over the next decade is one of the most documented corporate culture stories in American business history, and it still holds up. Tony made customer service the philosophical center of the entire enterprise. Not a function, but an identity. Free shipping in both directions. A 365-day return window. A call center that was explicitly not measured on call duration, because if a customer wanted to talk for 3 hours, you talked for 3 hours. There is a verified call that ran over 10 hours between a Zappos representative and a customer. Tony did not reprimand the employee. He repeated the story everywhere he spoke because it captured exactly what he was trying to build. New hires were offered $2,000 to quit after their training period concluded. If you were there for the salary rather than the mission, Tony would rather pay you to leave than have you dilute what everyone else was building. The people who turned down the money were not doing it because $2,000 was trivial. They were doing it because they had found something they did not want to leave. The Henderson headquarters looked nothing like an office. Decorations everywhere. Spontaneous celebrations erupting through the building. A culture book produced annually from completely unedited employee submissions about what working at Zappos actually meant to them. Tony read every single one. By 2007, revenue had topped $800 million. The following year, $1 billion. Profitable, growing, and genuinely beloved by the people who worked there. Amazon came in 2009 with $1.2 billion, structured to preserve Zappos culture and keep Tony in place as CEO. He accepted. He was 36, personally worth more than $200 million, and seemingly at the peak of everything he had been working toward since those Cambridge parties. He wrote Delivering Happiness, which became a New York Times bestseller. He toured the country telling auditoriums full of business people that profit and purpose were not enemies, that culture was the most durable, competitive advantage a company could build, that happiness was measurable and scalable, and that he had the data to prove it. He had the credibility. He had the story. He had the audience. But Tony Hsieh did not know how to stop. There was always another broken system his philosophy could repair, always another environment that needed the right conditions introduced so that connection could emerge, always another opportunity to prove that what had worked at Zappos was not a fluke, but a universal principle. Within a few years, he would risk $350 million trying to rebuild downtown Las Vegas. The experiment would eventually collapse, and within a few years, the experiment would unravel in ways nobody around him could have predicted. He looked at downtown Las Vegas in 2011 and found his next canvas. The Strip was a different world. Steve Wynn's towers, the Bellagio fountains, hundreds of billions of dollars in corporate casino infrastructure competing directly with the finest luxury properties anywhere on Earth. But go north, past the mega resorts, to Fremont Street and the blocks surrounding it, and you found something else entirely. The original Las Vegas, aging and hollow, bled dry by decades of watching all the money and energy migrate south. The casinos were exhausted. The streets were largely empty. Downtown had been left to decline while the city it anchored kept growing in every other direction. Tony did not see a dying neighborhood. He saw a blank page. In 2011, he announced Zappos would abandon its Henderson campus and relocate to the old Las Vegas City Hall building downtown, moving over 1,300 employees into a district most people were leaving as fast as they could. Then in January 2012, he launched what he called the Downtown Project. $350 million of his personal money. Not invested capital, not corporate funds. His own. The stated mission was to transform 40 city blocks of downtown Las Vegas into a living laboratory for community building. The vision was sweeping. Tony wanted a neighborhood dense with entrepreneurs, artists, technologists, and creatives who would live side by side, work in proximity, and generate the kind of spontaneous collisions he believed were the engine of human innovation. He had a metric he called return on collision. The more unexpected interactions occurred between interesting people, the more new ideas and new businesses and new connections would emerge. So the entire urban design logic was oriented around maximizing those encounters. Affordable housing, cheap commercial space, small independent businesses filling every available storefront. An ecosystem calibrated to attract exactly the kind of people who would make it richer simply by being present. Money flowed out with remarkable speed and minimal friction. Tony's team was writing checks to anyone with an idea and a willingness to plant themselves downtown. Restaurants, bars, coffee shops, co-working spaces, technology startups. No lengthy vetting process, no exhaustive due diligence. Belief and energy were the primary qualifications. The Downtown Container Park opened in November 2013. 29 shipping containers retrofitted into boutique retail and food stalls arranged around a central gathering space anchored by a 40-foot steel praying mantis that shot actual flames from its antenna on a programmed schedule. It was genuinely strange, genuinely wonderful, and unlike anything else in the city. People showed up. Downtown had a pulse again. Tony converted the old Ferguson's Motel into a communal living space, housing entrepreneurs and artists in small rooms around shared common areas, engineering the physical proximity he believed would produce organic community. The Life is Beautiful Music Festival launched in 2013 and brought tens of thousands of people to downtown streets that had been nearly deserted 2 years earlier. The national media was captivated. Tony was the billionaire who actually cared, the tech visionary applying Silicon Valley thinking to urban renewal, the man with a genuine philosophy and the resources to test it at scale. For a moment from the outside, it looked like it might actually work. Then, the cracks arrived. The businesses being funded without adequate diligence started failing in succession. Restaurants that could not cover rent, startups that burned through their runway and produced nothing sustainable, entrepreneurs who had been handed money based on enthusiasm rather than execution discovered that optimism does not negotiate with a landlord. The investment was draining away, and what it left behind was not the thriving ecosystem Tony had imagined. It was a collection of failed experiments on expensive real estate. Leadership of the project began fracturing. Early team members resigned. The chaos Tony had mistaken for creative energy was proving to be just chaos. There was no real management structure, no accountability infrastructure, no honest mechanism for identifying what was working versus what needed to be cut. Tony's philosophy of organic self-organization, which had produced something beautiful at Zappos, because everyone there had opted in and shared a common set of values, was not translating to a neighborhood of real people with varied motivations and no particular commitment to anyone's vision. By 2014, the media framing had reversed. The glowing profiles gave way to pointed questions about financial mismanagement, about a billionaire using a forgotten neighborhood as a personal laboratory, about whether the whole enterprise had ever been grounded in anything more than a very attractive idea. And Tony was quietly deteriorating. The energy that had defined him, that quality of warmth and intellectual restlessness that made him magnetic in any room, was becoming harder to locate. He was still physically present, still living in an Airstream trailer parked in the container park, still walking the streets. But people who knew him well were watching something recede that they could not quite name. He started using nitrous oxide with increasing frequency. Whippets, the small canisters of laughing gas producing a compressed euphoria that lasts perhaps 30 seconds before collapsing. He was going through them at a rate that alarmed everyone around him, cycling through canister after canister, pursuing a sensation that kept requiring higher frequency to produce diminishing returns. Then 2015 arrived and brought with it the worst stretch of his life. Jody Sherman, a tech founder who had received backing through the Downtown Project, died by suicide in January. He had been under severe financial pressure as his startup failed around him. Weeks later, another entrepreneur connected to the project, a man named Matt Berman, also died by suicide. Then in April, Ovik Banerjee, another founder with ties to the downtown experiment, took his own life. Several entrepreneurs connected to the Downtown Project died by suicide during that period. The questions that followed were uncomfortable. Had the culture of relentless optimism made failure feel like a moral catastrophe rather than a normal business outcome? Had the pressure of existing inside someone's utopian experiment become unbearable for people who were already struggling? There were no clean answers, and Tony did not look for them. He internalized the weight of it completely, turning it inward until it was crushing. But instead of using that weight as a reason to slow down and examine what had gone wrong, he accelerated. He started talking obsessively about dopamine mechanics, neurochemical optimization, the scientific engineering of well-being. The language of self-help collapsed into biohacking, and the biohacking collapsed into heavier substance use, ketamine, mushrooms, alcohol layered over the nitrous oxide. His behavior became unpredictable. His sleep dissolved. He moved through the night in a pharmaceutical fog, and as the people around him who genuinely cared kept trying to pull him back, the circle gradually shifted. The true believers drifted away. The enablers moved in. People whose usefulness to Tony was precisely that they would not ask him to stop, who would supply what he needed and confirm that everything was fine. At Zappos, the institution Tony had given 20 years of his life to was also coming apart. In 2013, he had imposed a management philosophy called holacracy across the entire company, eliminating job titles and reporting structures in favor of self-governing teams and distributed decision-making. The ideology was consistent with everything Tony had always believed about organic organization. The reality inside a company of that size was confusion and resentment. Within a year of the rollout, nearly 14% of the workforce had voluntarily left, many of them senior, experienced people the company could not easily replace. Amazon's gravitational pull was slowly overcoming the original promises of independence. The culture Tony had built was not dying dramatically. It was being replaced piece by piece by the standard corporate machinery he had spent his whole career trying to escape. And Tony, the CEO, was barely present. He was in his airstream, surrounded by the wrong people and the wrong substances, watching a dream come apart thread by thread. In 2015, the downtown project was formally restructured with new leadership brought in to manage what remained of the investment. Tony stepped back from operational control, but never psychologically. He was still convinced that the right intervention would save it, still unable to accept that some things cannot be rescued by trying harder. By 2016, the majority of the businesses he had seeded were closed. The container park was half empty. The co-living spaces were vacant. The tech startups had either failed or relocated somewhere with real infrastructure. The Life is Beautiful festival continued, but had been absorbed by professional event management and bore almost no resemblance to the organic street celebration Tony had originally imagined. In August 2020, Tony resigned from Zappos. 2 decades of his life handed over in a quiet press statement about pursuing new directions. No ceremony, no recognition proportional to what he had built. Just a door closing. He left Las Vegas not long after, left the Airstream, left Fremont Street, left the container park, and the praying mantis, and the years he had walked those blocks measuring collisions that never quite added up to community. He went to Park City, Utah, where he had been buying property, constructing what looked from the outside like yet another attempt at the same experiment, the same belief that the right environment could generate the belonging that had eluded him since childhood. Park City was darker than downtown had ever been. The circle had contracted to almost nothing. The people who remained were not there because they believed in Tony's vision. They were there because Tony was still writing checks. In November 2020, his family filed legal documents seeking conservatorship over his finances. They believed he was unable to make sound decisions, that he was being exploited, that he was a danger to himself. Tony left Park City before the process could be completed. He ended up in New London, Connecticut, at a house belonging to a former assistant named Rachel Brown, someone who had worked for him for years and remained loyal. He had been there approximately a week. He was not sleeping inside the house. He was in the storage shed behind it, roughly 8 by 10 feet, no windows, a single door. He had filled it with candles and with nitrous oxide canisters in quantities that deeply concerned the people around him. In the early hours of November 18th, 2020, people inside the house heard noise coming from the shed, banging, shouting. When they tried to reach him, they found the door could not be opened from the outside. Something was blocking it from within. At approximately 3:30 in the morning, smoke began pouring through the walls. Someone called 911. By the time firefighters broke through and reached him, the structure was fully involved. They pulled Tony out alive, but barely, with severe burns across much of his body and critical smoke inhalation damage. He was airlifted to Bridgeport Hospital. Tony Hsieh died on November the 27th, 2020, 9 days after the fire. He was 46 years old. The investigation concluded the fire was accidental. The candles had ignited materials inside the shed. Tony, heavily impaired, had been unable to escape. The medical examiner recorded smoke inhalation and thermal injuries as the cause of death. No evidence of foul play. Just a man undone by his own addiction who ran out of time. The legal proceedings that followed were prolonged and ugly. Dozens of people surfaced, claiming Tony had verbally promised them money in his final months. One sought $10 million on the basis of a conversation. A former assistant claimed more than $30 million for services rendered. Courts dismissed both claims, but the lawsuits kept arriving. A final ledger of what happens when a person with enormous resources and compromised judgment spends his last years surrounded by people whose primary interest was the money. Operations at the downtown Zappos campus wound down in 2021. Employees were relocated, and the building was eventually sold. The dream of 1,300 workers walking those streets every day, anchoring the ecosystem Tony had envisioned, was gone. The container park persists at roughly half capacity. The praying mantis still fires on schedule, shooting flames into the desert sky for tourists who have wandered up from the main Fremont Street experience and found something strange and tall and inexplicable. Most of them do not know what it represents, who built it, or what it cost the person who did. The city renamed a section of 4th Street near the container park in Tony's memory. His family established a foundation focused on mental health research and addiction recovery. The weight of that particular legacy does not require commentary. Here is what stays with me about Tony Hsieh. He was not wrong about the underlying principle. Culture is real. Community is real. Human connection is not a soft metric to be sacrificed when the quarterly numbers need improving. It is the foundation that everything else is built on. Zappos proved that for 15 years, with real revenue and real employee loyalty and a model that companies across the world have spent the subsequent decades trying to replicate. That proof is genuine. That legacy is intact. The fatal error was the assumption that it scaled infinitely, that what worked inside a company where everyone had actively chosen to be present, had passed through a hiring process, had literally turned down money to stay, would also work in a neighborhood populated by people who had made no such choice and signed no such covenant. Downtown Las Vegas was not a company. It was reality. Real people with real rent and real problems who had not enrolled in anyone's experiment and were not obligated to behave according to anyone's theory of collision-based innovation. Tony gave them money without the structures that would have made the money useful. He gave them belief without the accountability that would have made the belief sustainable. And when the money ran out and the downtown he had imagined refused to materialize, he had no tool left except to pour more of himself into the gap. He had always solved problems by building. He had no protocol for accepting that some experiments fail not because of inadequate resources, but because the hypothesis was wrong. The substance use was the answer to that impossibility. The shed in Connecticut was the end of a road that had been narrowing for years. Tony Hsieh spent his life engineering systems to produce the experience of belonging, because belonging never arrived on its own. The Harvard parties, the Zappos culture, the downtown project. Every one of them was the same attempt wearing different clothes. The attempt to build a container large enough and warm enough and intelligently enough designed that it would generate the thing he had been missing since childhood. He came closer than almost anyone. For one company in Henderson, Nevada, he actually did it. He built something real and lasting and genuinely beautiful. And then he spent the back half of his life trying to do it again somewhere bigger, at higher cost, with more desperate need, until the trying consumed everything it touched. The praying mantis still fires on schedule. Strangers stop on the sidewalk and look up at it together, briefly and unexpectedly connected by something absurd and spectacular in the middle of the desert. Tony would have called that a collision. He would have measured it. He just wanted people to feel something real. He wanted to prove you could design a world where belonging happened by intention, rather than accident. For one company, he actually proved it. He spent everything he had trying to prove it again. Tony Hsieh sold happiness. He packaged it, scaled it, put it in a book, and took it on tour. Then he took hundreds of millions of dollars and tried to build it inside a city. Instead, he became the thing he had spent his entire life running from. Alone, isolated, surrounded by the wrong people, in a shed in Connecticut, while the door stayed shut and the smoke rose. That was Tony Hsieh, the billionaire who delivered happiness to millions of people and never once figured out how to deliver it to himself. If the real stories behind the ambition and the tragedy that made Las Vegas what it is are the reason you keep watching, hit subscribe. Every legend has a story, and Vegas never forgets.